Hey, Morgan, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Dad Edge podcast. Honored to have you here.
Hey, this is really great. I'm glad to connect with you and your tribe and to be in this sacred space with you. It really is a privilege.
Me too. I wish I would have recorded that prayer that you said. That was awesome. Did that just come? I know the audience doesn't know what we're talking about, but it was very heartfelt. Yeah. And was that straight from the heart, or was that something you say pretty regularly?
Oh no, that was just what God brought to my heart. I mean, I believe, Larry, as you do, that God is the power behind all things. And Dallas Willard even said one time that everything that matters is invisible. And that's just a fascinating idea, but there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of content. People's lives are busy. What we need is God, right? And so even in these podcasts, my heart is to create an environment through conversation that people encounter God, that they walk away and it's not Dad Edge, it's not Morgan Snyder becoming a king. It is, I experience God's presence and God's power, and that brought transformation. So I don't know, prayer has become just a center driving force in my life, a place of curiosity, a place of relationship, a place of power, and it's just something I love to do. So I was glad to get to do it with you this morning.
Yeah, that was awesome. So sorry guys, you missed it, but it was fantastic. And now I know.
Hey, maybe we'll pray together at the end. We'll see where God leads us.
I take you up on that. Let's do that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Deal done.
Great.
Hey, so let's get started with you and your childhood. What was your childhood like growing up?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I just love what you're doing with men and particularly fathers, because it's the right question. Our story matters, and there is a lot hidden in our story. So when I go back to my story, I was born into a loving home, but my dad was not religious at all, agnostic Jew. He went through bar mitzvah and went through the practices, but didn't practice as an adult. My mom was a very stoic Catholic, very religious culture, but not a vibrant faith that was a part of our family. So our family, in all practicality, was agnostic. And then the more important thing is my dad grew up very poor. His dad was very poor, was a scrap man and a tile guy. And my dad saved the family from bankruptcy when he was 8 years old with his change jar. So his mom came to him, the only child, and they broke the bank, literally the glass jar, and bought 3 bus tickets to save the family and find a new life down in Florida somewhere from Pennsylvania. So my story in some ways was born out of a dad, that his dad was a foster kid, and he lived out of a message. He's a good, loving man, and still is an important part of my role in my life. But Larry, the message was, I am loved when I provide, right? That 8-year-old boy was formed when that glass jar broke. And so fast forward over the next 40, 50 years of his life, he pursued that story of I find value, I find worth, I find love by providing. So he wanted to be a biologist. He loved the ocean, but he became a doctor instead, because that's a biologist that makes some money, basically. So my dad's a very good man, and he wasn't home. He wasn't there. And as a boy, I wanted to feel alive. I wanted to feel true. I wanted to feel value. And so as I matured, I should say, as I grew older, I found worth in leadership and women, and all the while searching to answer the question that a boy has. Do I have what it takes? Am I the real deal? And that question wasn't answered in the places I needed it most. So I went searching to find something that made it work. So fast forward, I had a radical conversion in college, because I basically won the world and lost my soul. I had won the game. I was president of my class every year for 5 years, 4.23 GPA, beautiful girl. I won the world and I lost my soul. I remember, Larry, looking in the mirror the night before college and finding what I felt like was a man without a soul. And I said, if I die tonight, what will I say to God? Because I know he exists. I don't know what he's like, but I've done nothing but serve myself. So there's got to be another way. It's got to have something to do with God. I don't feel like a man. It has something to do with masculinity. I'm going to find God. So that was my journey. I came to Christ. It was radical. But here's the most important thing. It didn't heal my soul. It saved my soul, but I still found myself a boy in a man's body. And so the next 20 years of my story and the advent of becoming a king was simply the story of the path and the process of recovering wholeheartedness, choosing to be initiated as a man, fathered as a son by the living God, to go through the process of maturation, initiation, and apprenticeship in the kingdom of God, which is essential to recover our joy.
So I heard that about your father, that he was a provider. And a good man, but also a provider. And that I didn't know the part though about the glass jar and breaking the bank for the bus tickets. It's interesting that you say that, because I find myself being that in a way. I'm not that person, but I'm sure tempted to be that person. And I think I'm not that person because I try to be as intentional as possible with I've got 4 boys, so a lot of energy over here. But
yes,
I'll never forget it was like a major awakening when I was about 14. At the time, my mom's been married 3 times. The guy that she was with was living with us for a while. All the furniture in the house was his. My mom worked for him. And I'll never forget coming home one time and my mom was crying in the middle of the family room floor. All the furniture in the house was gone. Her job was gone. He was gone. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what is going on? And that image was like burned in my mind, because in my mind,
yes.
I was like, what's going to happen to us? Are we going to lose this house? And I remember my mom saying things like, I don't know if I have enough money for groceries this week and things like that. And what I've noticed is for years now, I've been like there's a part of me that's like, I never want to be in that situation ever again. And so there is that big part. And I think we're speaking to a lot of men, because a lot of men get really wrapped up in that provider role. How has this, because I know you're a father to a boy and a girl, a teenage son, right?
Yep. 16-year-old son and 13-year-old daughter.
Right. So it's Joshua, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Abigail.
Joshua's my 16 and Abigail. Yes.
Yeah. So if we could fast forward for a moment, how has this impacted your relationship with them?
Oh, that is a really insightful question, because it's shaping that relationship far more than I'm even aware. It's only in receiving pieces of healing that I actually uncover the depth of the brokenness below it and the woundedness of how much it's shaping it. And so I think to answer that question, just even going back into your story for a moment, Larry, okay, so you have some sense of security, right? You have furniture, you have a mom, you have a guy in your life. It's not your dad, but it's a guy. And then you come home and it's all gone, right? The center of your universe, as you know it, whatever that center was, is taken from you. And now there's this message to the boy of something like, it's on me now, right? I'm responsible because there's no one else. If I don't do it, no one else will. Right. And the story that you just described is personal to you, but so mythic to so many men, of being put in a kingly role far too young. Because what happened was, in that moment, your boyhood on some level ceased, right? You were no longer given permission to be a boy. You were asked, demanded to be a man. And it happens to all of us men in 2 different ways. Either it's a shattering like that of something external that sends a message. We're wounded And the lie is, it's up to you. You're on your own. Make this happen. Or out of the need to fulfill the ache of the soul to answer our question, we go pursue it. So we give our gifting over to uninitiated kings, right? Older men that see our gifting and they put us to work to build their kingdom, their bank account, their reputation, all in the name of self. And so there's a lot of grief where we become a person that is uninitiated, that has a wounded heart. And out of that wound, there's a lie. Out of that lie, there's a vow. And out of that vow, it's how we make life work. And so, yes, I found myself looking at my dad as a high achiever, a provider. And I wanted to love my family the way my dad did. And so I'm going to provide. So I came to Christ and I take the journey, but still most of that energy to be a great dad, to be a loving husband, to be a good man. Larry, when I look under the surface, a lot of that energy was the self-life. It wasn't Christ in me. It was still my brokenness energizing me in the name of Christianity, in the name of be a good man. It wasn't the with God life. It wasn't offering strength. It was actually taking my question. I'm a good man if I am loving my wife, right? If I'm a good dad, then I'm a good man. It's taking my question to my world. And so it's been 22 years of becoming increasingly aware of two men at work within me. You said, I'm not that man. And I think what I would suggest is, for me, I see it as a civil war. I am partly that man and partly not that man. The true man in me that's being more healed, more restored, brings strength out of overflow of knowing my identity. But the wounded boy yet to be restored in me is looking at my world to answer that question. And so my kids are going through their initiation, their childhood into adulthood, and they're making their own choices. And I have to beware, for example, of are they responsible for my happiness? And if I don't have my question answered, it flows right into my parenting that I need them to perform. But as I become healed, I become a kind of father that can come to them and say, you're not responsible for my happiness. I'm here to love, and I can release all the outcomes to God.
How did this has got to be years and years and years of soul searching and reflection and as you said, maturing. Do you feel that you're pretty clear on all this now, or do you feel like you're just scratching the surface?
Boy, C.S. Lewis, I appreciate it. He said, the way he says it is that heaven, the restoration of all things, is the consummation of our earthly apprenticeship. Like one day it'll be complete. One day. You know, one of my mentors died of cancer, lung cancer. He fought it for 12 years. And he had the privilege to be able to make his grave marker before he was dead, which is a fascinating opportunity. Not too many people get to do that. And on it, he wrote his name. And under his name, it said, "End of construction. Thank you for your patience." Oh, like when I say that, I just get emotive. Like I feel my body and the tears come because I know I am not the man I was. My wife is actually thriving right now. And that was not the case 15 years ago. My kids are thriving. And yet I've caused them great pain. I'm not the man I was, but I'm not the man I will be. And so I think to respond to that, I have to say both of them, both. Wholeheartedly. There is so much promise for what's available in the journey of restoration, not just salvation, but restoring the man, tending to the boy, like in the story you said of going back to the boy in that room, in your childhood home, and inviting Christ to tend to him, inviting the Father to come and bring him into restoration. There's so much more. And what I learned is it's a way of living. It's a way of seeing. It's a way of understanding that all of life is kingdom apprenticeship. And so I want more. I just want more.
So you mentioned you've brought your family pain, and they've probably have given you the grace of their patience. And I think a lot of men who've read your book, they're like, oh, yeah, Morgan's got it all together. Like, probably always had this great life. How have you brought them pain? And then how have you been able to give yourself grace and then allow them to give you some grace?
Oh, I'll go as soon. I'll start as recently as this weekend, which happens to be a couple days ago. My son turned 16, and big rite of passage for him. My daughter turned 13, and those are big, significant moments in our family story. And so, with my daughter, she's a different species. First of all, she's a young woman. And secondly, she has a very different temperament than me, very different gifting. And like, Larry, I'm chasing it, but I am missing the mark again and again. Like with my son, I just felt like we were in step, and I get him. With my daughter, I'm missing it. And so we had planned a weekend away. And part of her initiation, we were going to go to a fancy hotel, to a fancy meal, just the three of us, my wife, my daughter, and I. And we proposed it to my daughter, and she's like, Dad, that's what you want to do? I said, well, that's what I thought that'd be good. And she goes, I don't want to do that. She goes, I don't want to be the only child family. She goes, that's so awkward. Can Bubs come? Like, which is her brother. And I'm just going, you're kidding me. Like, we're offering you gold, right? And you want your brother to come? And again, like Larry, I had to pause and go, this is not about me. This is not about me. But the reason why I'm sharing that story is probably a dozen times that same idea played out with my daughter, and I drove it into a cliff. I wanted to teach her how to fly fish. Like, she didn't want to fly fish. Like, I bought her hiking boots. She doesn't want to hike. She wants to play volleyball. I want to be one-on-one with her. We do these dates. She wants to be social with, like, the more the merrier. I'm an introvert. She's an extrovert. It's not about me, but so many times that message of, I want to be a great dad. And even, to be honest, of, I want it to look good. I missed a mark. And she's very keen on emotion. My kids are very emotionally mature, and I am prone to struggle with depression and anxiety, and carry a lot of spiritual warfare with the nature of my work. And so my kids will feel responsible for managing the mood in the house. So when I'm taken out, my kids notice it, and I notice that they try to step up and bring joy and bring laughter and bring connection when they see me taken out. And so those are just examples of things that are in process with me, that I've blown it. And then the celebration of it, to say to my kids, if you ask my kids, what does daddy say more than most things? And one of the things they would say is, he says, Abigail, Joshua, I'm a first-time parent. I've never had a 16-year-old son before. I've never had a 13-year-old daughter before. We are figuring this out together. I'm new at this. You're new at this. And before, that would have felt like weakness a decade ago, 2 decades ago. Now it feels like strength, because what we all have is a father that's orchestrating our initiation. We're in good hands. And so that's a strong statement to say, Abigail, you're right. I missed the mark. You don't want to go away with me and mom. What a terrible idea. Let's have Bubs, and why don't we cook a dinner for you? And then let's throw a bash the next night with all your friends. And that's what you want to do. That's where we're going. And so the weekend was not what I intended for a 13-year-old rite of passage, but I held on to the most important things, and I communicated the message of, I delight in you, and there's nothing you can do or not do or say or not say that will cause me to withdraw my delight. And so that's my frontier. I'm blowing it all the time, but I'm doing my best to really stay curious about her heart and curious with what God's doing in her story.
Whew. Where do we go from there? There's a lot there, my friend. And I mean that in a good way.
What comes up, Larry? What comes up for you when you hear that? Where do you go?
There's a couple things. I really relate to, hey, I've never had a 16-year-old or a 13-year-old. We're figuring it out. I've had that same talk with my oldest two. I'm like, you know how you're still trying to figure out how to be 14? Well, I'm still trying to figure out how to be 45. And I'm still trying to figure out how to raise a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. I've never done it. And every day is new. And tomorrow I'll be raising a 14-year-old, 3-month and 6-day-old. And I've never done that. That'll be the first day for me. So
wow.
There's definitely that human side that I love humility. When it comes to screwing up, here's the funny thing. I don't enjoy screwing up, but I enjoy screwing up. I hate screwing up because I screwed up, but I also like being humble and telling my kids like, yeah, remember what I said and what I did? Yeah, that's a great example of what not to do. Like I'll share this with you. You could probably relate to this. So my 4-year-old, it was 2 weeks ago, and we were sitting there at dinner, and I had cleaned up 5 spills that day. I actually counted them. First 2 were in the morning. Both of them were milk. And then
Larry.
Another couple came later in the day. And then my 4-year-old comes to the dinner table with this big 32-ounce cup. He can't even hold it with one hand. He's holding it with 2 hands. And I'm like, hey, I was like, that's a really big cup for you, man. He's sitting right next to me. And as I say that, I wore it. And all the ice water went all over me, all over my food. And here's the funny thing. I sat down to dinner. It was like, oh, it's Sunday night. It's a beautiful night. We're going to have great family time. We're going to have this. We're going to all these expectations, right? And expectations are the first disaster, right? To have all these expectations because sitting there with 4 boys, a disaster is going to happen. So he spills this all over me. And I was like, dude, what the heck, man? And he looks at me, and he's like, I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry. And like a grown man, I ignored him. So that was super mature of me. Yeah. And I was just like, I told you not to bring that 32-ounce cup over here. And my wife, we have a rule. We never correct each other in front of the kids. So if she disciplines in a certain way, I have her back no matter what. If I disagree, it's behind closed doors and vice versa. And my wife looked at me and she's like, and she's very low key. Nothing ruffles her feathers, which I'm shocked because we have 4 boys. And she looks at me and she goes, Larry, it's just water. He feels really bad. And she said that in front of everybody. And at that moment, I felt like there was a spotlight of absolute shame. And I'm like, oh. So here's my question. So I took a pause. I went in our bedroom. I kind of cooled down, which I never do that. Like I was pretty upset, mostly with myself. Yeah. I came back and I told all the kids, I'm like, hey, you see what Dad just did? Don't ever do that. When you have your own kids, there are spills that are going to happen. Don't ever act like how I did. Okay. Like that's a good lesson what not to do. But here's the thing about humility and screwing up and time after time after time. What I notice is my kids, they forgive very quickly and they give you a lot of grace. What I find is, and I find this with most men, and I feel like you can probably relate to this. I have a really hard time forgiving myself. Dude, that ate me up for like 3 days. Like I just couldn't let it go. And I feel like a lot of men, they cannot give themselves any grace, any space to screw up. Like it's like, I got to do this well or not at all. How have you been able to incorporate grace for yourself when bad moments happen?
I think one of the fundamental ideas that you're surfacing, Dallas Willard says actions reveal beliefs 100% of the time. So we have our theology, right? What do you believe, right? Our creedal statements. But what's really helpful, it's really honest as a dad to pause and say, look at my actions. What do they really believe about, or what do they really express about what I believe about life? That's your true theology about God, about myself, about what the story is that I'm living in. Like that is fundamental. And I think what you're getting to, Larry, is that most men live fundamentally with an unspoken belief and a subconscious belief that life is up to me, that I'm on my own, that I need to make it happen. And therefore, most men feel mostly behind. If you just do an inventory, like I'm behind in my finances, I'm behind in my work, my marriage, my health, I'm behind in my yard work. It's an incessant feeling of whatever it is, I'm behind. And that is not in alignment with the worldview of the Christian life. You know, Jesus models many things, but in every moment of his life, the one thing he is always modeling is what it looks like to live as a son. Jesus never lived independently. And that's just a fascinating idea, because you see this kind of like creepy religious, white robe, greasy hair, independent, perfect, baby on his shoulder, kind of lamb on his shoulder. Like he looks like he has it all together. Like his worldview is Father centered. He says, God, my prayer, Father, is that they would be one heart and one mind with you, Father, as I am one heart and mind with you. He says, whatever you see me doing, that's the Father in me. I do nothing apart from my Father. So you just think about that. Jesus Christ was not independent. He was strength through dependency. He was total union with his Father. Could you imagine what it would be like to live with an actual emotive experience in our bodies that we have our Father? Like you said, you and your wife never, like you said, you have each other's back. That's just a powerful technique to say, okay, we need to unpack it because it's all matters of the heart. But in front of our kids, the primary message we're going to communicate is your parents are united. You don't have to pick sides. In my household growing up, it was always go to mom for this and dad for this, because we're two separate universes. And so what it reveals is so much of the orphan spirit. We operate fundamentally as orphans and slaves. And so if we can use the symptoms, if we can use the medicators as indicators of a deeper reality, it can surface a condition of fatherlessness. And when we begin to open our hearts and our minds and our stories to a belief that we might have learned the Father wrong, that he wants to be known and come to us and reparent us and father us, it changes our internal world, where you can look at your kids and you can say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Will you forgive me? That was not about you. That was about me. And that's not okay. And I want you to know that that's not what our dad is like. And we're both learning him together. We're being fathered together. Let's learn him together. That's strength. And that's the fundamental shift in masculine initiation, I believe. The narrow gate through which every man has to walk, and the gate through which all other gates are open, is coming to know God, not just as God's Savior, but as God the Father and us, his true Son. It changes everything.
So how you give yourself grace, is that just being in union with God?
It's real time. I think it's a really good question. So my wife had to leave for a funeral yesterday morning, and it was a last minute, unexpected cancer story, and we're leaving for a trip 2 days from now. So I'm in the throes of a book launch, high level mission, a lot of warfare. And then we had this curveball of a funeral, and all of a sudden overnight, the parenting's on me. And and so in my mind, I'm blessing her. It's the right thing. I'm all in. I want to love. But Larry, I've not become the kind of person that can do it as the man I want to be. So I got super frustrated, dropped her off at the airport to pick up a rental car. And we called ahead of time, make sure they were open. They weren't open. Or I dropped her off and I left and no one was there. And so there were all these customers there, frustrated. So she had to Uber back. And the point of the story was I was pissed. I was pissed at her. She was just the target. But what I was really frustrated with was I don't have time for this. And what I mean by that is it was shame of why haven't I become the kind of person in this instance to live with margin, to expect the unexpected? Why have I not become the kind of person that doesn't react in anger, but pauses, responds in love? And so I used to beat myself up over those sort of things. Of why were you short with her? Why did you tell her, why don't you just get an Uber back to the airport, instead of saying, there's nothing I'd rather do. Your cousin just died. There's nothing I'd rather do than love you, drive you to the airport, pray with you, bless you, give you cash. And it used to send me in a shame spiral. But because I've become a son, because I know that we're all under construction, because I know I'm not the man I used to be and I'm not the man I will be, it was a chance to pause. And here's a real practical example of receiving grace. Pause and saying, Father, what do you say about this? What's your interpretation of the story? What do you want to say about me? And so I paused by way of example. And you know what he said? He said, Morgan, you are fighting for your wife. You're loving her well. Do you remember that conversation, Morgan, yesterday where she came to you and told you this crazy idea about driving across the country? And what do I think? Expecting me to say that's a bad idea. And I said to her, I bless you. I think that's a totally reasonable idea. Let's do it. Put it on the credit card. We got this. I forgot about that. But when I asked the Father, he reminded me. And he said, you're under a lot of stress right now. And we're in this. We're in this. I got you. You're doing well. And it's my task to receive his affection. I'm the only obstacle in receiving his affection. And so in that moment, I'm sitting in the Colorado sun. Spring is finally turning to summer here. The snow finally stopped, and I was able to feel the warmth of the sun on my face, feel the Father's affection, feel his abundance, even though it's costing us a bunch of money. I could feel abundance, feeling his celebration over me as a husband, even though I'm blowing it, turning to the Father, hearing his words, staying in his counsel, is an example of a very practical exercise to receive grace.
That's an incredible example, man. I really like that example a lot. What's your image of who God is, as far as if you could describe him to someone else, and what your relationship is with him? And even if you could do that through the lens of you're a father yourself and a husband yourself, what does that look like for you?
Buddy, that's a big question. That's, it's interesting. Like, okay, so now I'm crying. I go, okay, why am I crying? That's interesting. That's really interesting. My son is going through his initiation, and he's in his middle of his vision quest. Started at 13, and we celebrated last Friday at 16 of this mark. And the 4 questions I gave him when he started was, these are the questions, son, for you, that you need to find your answers over your lifetime with God. But I believe your vision quest will provide a lot of that. And one of them is, who is God? We all have to come to that. I would say when I was growing up, God was distant, was an authority person. He was right and moral, and he basically stood for everything I should stand for, but I can't find myself doing. He was not life. Life was everything outside of God. Life was girls and alcohol and illegal activity and gambling and leadership. That was life. But God was this other thing. And then I would say God was a savior. God saved my life, and I gave my self-life away, and I gave my trust and confidence to God. So I quit pursuing life and become rich, become a CEO, and marry a Southern belle. And I married instead a feminist from the Midwest, and I fell in love with God, and I haven't been rich a day in my life. And so God was a driver. God was salvation. God was truth. And then something changed. God became a person. I met a God who thinks and feels and loves and laughs and plays, a God that's always present, a God that really is invested in the process. And then, Larry, I think where I teared up is not only did I fall in love with God, I fell in love with Christ, but then I received the love of a father. That was the biggest shift. God became a father that actually was in charge of everything. That's when I left the center of my story and gave God back the throne. And then I realized, you know who God is to me? He's the beginner of all things. He's the initiator of my story. He has my best in mind. He's inviting me to participate and respond to his plan for my life that's really, really good. His initiation for my son and my daughter and my wife and their place in the world. And he's playful and he's patient and he is really near. And he is really generous in ways that I have yet to even risk receiving in him, in the audacity of his generosity. And so there's so much more to say, but I feel like most of it defies words. But as I well up with emotion, I know that demonstrates what I actually believe is it's real intimacy and it's real time.
That is quite an example of it just paints a really, really good picture. I appreciate you sharing that. I'll share this with you. The book Fathered by God by John Eldredge. I only got through one chapter of it. I only got through one chapter of it because I was like, wow, this book is going to hit me. And I knew when I listened to the first chapter, I was like, I need to take breaks during this. I'll share this with you. And do you mind if I put you on the spot and ask you a couple questions, just man to man?
Anything you want. Anything you want.
And my hope is that I think this will serve the audience as well. I think it's safe to say that a lot of us have just father wounds, and, my mother and biological father were married for a handful of years. They got divorced when I was about 9 months old, and then they parted ways. The divorce was pretty bitter. Didn't know him. My mom got remarried when I was 4. That guy adopted me, and that was my dad. Actually, at that point in my life, I thought that that's what moms do, is they go out and they find dads. So, and then
wow.
It gets a little crazier. So they got divorced when I was 10. He left. So I haven't seen him since. But when I was 12, I unexpectedly and accidentally, and just for the sake of time, I won't go into the details, but I met my biological father. And at the time, he was remarried, had 2-year-old son, another one on the way. We hung out for, I think, 4 or 5 months, maybe 6. I don't remember. And then I felt this drift start to happen between us. And every time we were together, like I felt like there was heaviness and tension and something heavy on him, but I couldn't identify really what it was. The only thing that I can describe how it was is, how you're dating a girl and she's not into you and she kind of like just sort of pulls away, kind of pulls the fade away a little bit. That's what it was. And then we had a conversation. The conversation basically went, I don't remember exactly how it went. I just know it was like, hey, I can't do this right now. Sorry. And we parted ways. And then 15 years ago when I was 30, I was sitting in a Starbucks here in St. Louis and sitting there sipping coffee with a friend of mine who came walking in to get his morning coffee with my father. And so, yeah, it was pretty crazy. But we've had this relationship now for 15 years. And there was my mom was married 3 times total. There were constantly men in and out. And there were a lot of them were the same guy, if you know what I mean. Like this, there was always alcohol, there was toxicity and drugs and that kind of thing. And so I kind of grew up with like, wow, okay, I know what not to do. There's a lot of things I don't know how to do, but I know what not to do. But when I listened to the first chapter of John's book, man, this is going to hit me hard. I couldn't get through that first chapter and go on to the second one. I still haven't, just because I was like, man, this book is going to hit me like a ton of bricks. So like, there's that part of me that I resonate with this topic, and even being 45 years old, like this topic, man, it hits me hard, man. So like, there's that part of you that feels, I'm never good enough. Did I do something wrong? Will I be an okay father myself? Like all these questions over and over that are just not the good questions. But you know what I mean? Do you see where I'm getting at? And
I do. I'm tracking. Yes.
So I guess my question is, John's big message is being fathered by God. And I know that's part of your message as well. And I think a lot of us, me included, I'm like, okay, I get that. And man, that feels really good. But how do I do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Larry, first off, I appreciate your vulnerability. I really appreciate your risking putting yourself out there. And I first just want to say, I'm so sorry. That's awful. That's brutal.
Well, yeah. And I hope I hope you don't think I shared that for pity or anything like that. It was just more like,
no, not at all.
Yeah,
not at all. But here's what I mean by awful is, the boy is always looking to learn, what is the father like? In the first place we come to our view of the father heart of God is what we experienced or the lack thereof as father in our earliest childhood. So what you just described was the boy learned at 9 months old, there is no father. Okay, your soul learned that. So you use this phrase in what you just shared, part of me. And that's a very important phrase because part of you is 45 years old. And that man is mature and sophisticated and competent, loves his wife, loves his 4 boys, is killing it. Part of you. But there is also, I want to suggest, a 9-month-old part of you. And that part of your soul was deeply traumatized. And he had mom, which is good. And mom survived. But that 9-month-old learned there is no dad. He doesn't exist. And then in that teenage boy in you, what age were you in the 4 to 5 months when your biological dad first showed up?
I was 12.
Okay. So it's so critical because right at 12, the boy's looking for someone to show him the way to become a man. Because at 12, he's becoming a man biologically, but he has to become a man soulfully through a shepherding process. And so your heart is looking for dad because you're made for dad. You were born out of the Trinity. You were born from a father-centered view. Dad showed up. And so your 12-year-old heart, unbeknownst to you, opens up and says, I've got a dad. And your dad, from what I hear you saying, it wasn't about you, Larry. He literally couldn't handle it. And the message on some level is very likely something's wrong with me. Am I not enough that my dad wants to be around? Like, he made me and he doesn't even want me in his life. Like that fade away, like maybe from a girl, but this is my dad. And then no conversation. And so you're only left to come to conclusions because of evil and a broken world of this is about me. I'm defective. I'm lacking. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy of love and belonging. And so there is still that boy that's 12 years old that needs loved, that needs healed, that needs restored. So, excuse me. So you take a 9-month-old part of you, then you have a 12-month-old part of you. And then even the 30-year-old part of you that's in the coffee shop of like, you're a man now. You are raising kids and you have a career and you're doing good things. And he shows up and what you didn't say is he came and said, I'm sorry and forgive me. And now I'm getting my heart back and I understand where I hurt you. I have no access to your life. I don't deserve any place in your life. I only want to bless you. But if you want me to be in your life, I'm open to be curious about what it was like to have my lack. Like there was none of that. And so what I want to suggest is the Christian life of masculine initiation has much to do with being aware of the young places in us that surface and manifest, that it's God inviting us to receive healing. And so you find it, let's go back to the beginning of our conversation where you were frustrated with your boys, right? And it was 5 spills in a day and you have 4 boys. Like you said, it's always going to be chaos. That's not just about the spill. There is part of the 9-month-old. There is no dad. If I don't clean it up, no one will, right? There's part of the 12-year-old going, this is up to me. Like, I don't have time for spills because I have to get a lot of crap done. Or can I just have a moment of peace? It's hard work being in charge of this world that I'm running, right? You have these young places. And so they come out of your 45-year-old self as frustrated, short, angry. And then your 45-year-old goes, oh man, I feel bad. That's not what I wanted to do. But those are different parts of you. And so it's so important for our listeners out there to understand we have to read the text of our story. And in our current day, what manifests, where do we feel shame? Where do we feel fear? Where do we feel scarcity? And then ask the question, how old were we when we first felt that? Where did that story manifest? Because the thing is, Larry, the pattern continues. Circumstances change, people change, but we go with us. He will keep showing up. You can't outrun your false self. You have to invite him to be healed, to be restored. So I think it's really important to pay attention to the indicators in our story and let them be our guide for God to raise the condition of fatherlessness and courageously say, I want another way. God, I don't know what to do. I'm at a loss, but I'm going to risk believing you're a good father. And so I'm going to let you father me in this particular place.
You need to get out of my head, man.
What do you do? Like just on a heart level, what do you hear?
From what you just said?
Yeah. Or where do you go? What's your reaction?
Well, I got to tell you, I'm a big believer in counseling and a big believer in talking to people who are smarter than you, not smarter than you, but smarter than me, to basically help me through some things. I mean, if you would have, if we would have had this conversation 20 years ago, it would have been very different. But what I can tell you is that a lot of the work that I've put in to heal with this whole thing, so it's been a lot of work. I've never had anybody reflect that. And that was really powerful. I don't know if you could tell or not, but I was sweating as you were saying it. And I think because we develop self-defense mechanisms, right? And so I saw your body language and you let the defenses down, right? And we all have them. The false self is simply our way to make life work apart from God. It's our fig leaf. It's a caricature that insulates us from pain because we don't want to be hurt. But it also insulates us from the actual power of God moving in our life. And that's the Christian life. It's embodied power. I mean, that's the whole idea of becoming a king, of how do we become the kind of wholehearted person who can be entrusted with the care of God's kingdom and rule and subdue the earth, like it says, care over a realm on behalf of love, on behalf of courage and vulnerability for others. And that
only comes through going back in our story and doing the work to heal, to excavate, to be curious. And so I saw in your body an openness and permission to let the younger places come to the surface, to let them have voice, because we resent them. They are uncooperative. 12-year-old boys are inside of me. The 12-year-old inside of me is very uncooperative with the adult me because he doesn't want to work as hard as I want to work. He also wants to play and he wants to be silly. And my intensity with that broken part of me doesn't give him permission to be silly. And what I think one of the things my kids would tell you if they were here, and my wife, is I've gotten a lot more playful through this process. I used to be very somber. My intensity plus a broken heart led to just drivenness that was always not enough, intensity, and lacking joy. I lost my smile. But by allowing the 12-year-old to receive Christ, allowing the 9-month-old to receive the tender fathering, the affection that comes from heaven that was intended to be bestowed by my earthly dad, but I missed, it didn't happen. I got that back. And I can tell you, like, I'm pretty playful now. And I do these workouts with my son, and he's a beast, and I'm terrible, and I am not fit, and I'm not coordinated, and he's amazing, and he just laughs at me and I laugh at me. And so there's so much hope. And what I would suggest to you and to the listeners is I'm guessing there are young places in each of us raised in this conversation. We're all being taken back to a memory. And before racing off to the next thing, right? We all have the next thing, the next piece of content, the next requirement, to just pause and say, God, I want to risk believing that you're a good father. And I want to risk being curious about what's presenting this memory, this memory in my story that's surfacing in this dialogue between Morgan and Larry. Holy Spirit, shine your light. You are a teacher, you're a counselor, you're a safe and strong, trustworthy guide. Where do you want to take me back in my story? What age am I? Where are we geographically? What's the place? I want to feel it with my senses. What does it smell like? What are the textures? What does it look like? What did I feel like in that place? And Jesus, you have come to heal the broken parts of the whole of a man and the whole of a woman. And so Jesus offers to come to that boy or come to that teenager or come to that young man. He offers to say, all this stuff here, this was not your fault. And you came to believe about me is not true. And I want to lead you back to the Father. The Father, your Father is generous and he's warring on your behalf and he has tears in his eyes and he's been waiting for you. But he's very patient. He waits to be wanted for just the right moment. And so Jesus says, come with me. We can do this together. We can go and receive the Father. And that younger you can come and look and ask the Father what he looks like and see his face and see his smile and watch him come as he truly is, not as we've learned him to be. But it's up to us Jesus says, will you open yourself? Will you open this part of your soul to receive more of me than you've come to receive and more of me that you've come to believe? I want to give you back to the Father and the Father back to you. And the Father welcomes you and says, this is on time and you are on time. You're on time in your story. And I've been waiting for this moment. This is our moment. If you would receive it, We can have so much more, and we can finish this together.
Morgan, I got to tell you,
that's
man,
what the Father's like.
That, do you know we've had almost 600 episodes on this show? Never had one like this.
Oh, God's wild. He's wild.
I mean, this has been really powerful. I think I can only count on one hand how many times I've gotten choked up, but this was definitely one of them. I want to ask you one final question as we wrap up here. I want to speak to the men that maybe way down deep, they don't feel worthy of doing life with God. And at times, I mean, you know, I'm one of them. It's like, well, shoot, man, God knows all my dirty laundry. Like, who am I to hang out with him? Right. What would God say to us as men who are like, well, what if I'm not worthy? Or what if I do too many things wrong? What if I've had too many sins in my day? What if that relationship what if I'm not acceptable to him? I mean, these are the things we tell ourselves quietly, right?
And these are the things every one of us tells ourselves, Larry, right? Every one of us in our secret places has questions of who am I really? And am I a disappointment? Am I worthy? And what I've come to learn is we will never live beyond our identity. So what we actually believe about who we are, that's expressed through our actions, not our creedal statements, not our theology, but our actions reveal what we believe about who we are. We won't live beyond that. And that's why this theology out there of sin management and a sinner saved by grace is so destructive. Because if you're a sinner saved by grace, at core, you will never live beyond sin because you're a sinner saved by grace. And the grace is true, but the sin truer still based on that identity. And so you may have short-lived victories, but if that's what you truly believe, you will never receive healing. But that's not what God, that's not the way he expresses his heart to us. You know, in Paul's letters in the New Testament, it's so fascinating how he calls out, he says, the saints in Corinth, the saints in Philippi, the saints in Ephesus. He's William Wallace saying, sons of Scotland, right? There are all these characters with pitchforks and shovels sharpened to be axes. And they're a mess. They've got side ponytails and they're servants and they're working class. And he bestows dignity where Wallace rides out and says, sons of Scotland, like you're free men. Now, fight for it. You're free. That's who you are. And what I've come to learn, Larry, is that the most important thing we can know about any human being, beginning with ourselves, is the truest identity we have is that we were made in the image of God, that we were fashioned by his hands, that he dreamed us up, that the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit sat together and they said, we have this idea. What if we make humans in our likeness and give them the reins to the kingdom? And so it said they made us in their image. And so if the truest thing about us is that we're a failure, we're a disappointment, we're sin, then that's the truest thing about God. And if the truest thing about God is that God is love and God is true and God is courage and God is kind and God is daring and God is altogether everything that we would love to be, then that's who we are. And if that's who we are, the invitation is to become who we are. George MacDonald said, since we are the sons of God, we must become the sons of God. And so what I would say to those listeners is I want to suggest there's something deeper than the shame. There's something deeper than the sin. And that something is the image bearing of God in us that cannot be taken, that we will bear for eternity. And since we are that person, then we must become that person. And here's the hope, and I'll finish with this, is I believe with all my heart, because I've experienced it to be true, that our secret life can grow and move from a place of our deepest shame and our greatest fear to becoming our greatest strength. In time and over time, the things that we have the most shame can become our most glorious realities. And the places of our deepest struggle, we can actually teach from, offer from, and bring to the world in love out of that struggle a decade from now, if we consent to a process. And so we are the sons of God. How will we become the sons of God?
Man, oh man. Morgan, this has been insanely powerful.
It's been an honor for me, a real honor that you would risk, Larry, opening up your soul and your story in front of your tribe. Well done. That takes immense courage. Well done.
And well, thanks for giving me so much clarity. This has been a ton of clarity. I've never heard this reflected back in such a way. So I appreciate you taking the time to do it. This has just been awesome, man.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. And for our listeners out there, like, we are just scratching the surface. My hunch is some things have been raised by the Spirit, and you're going, okay, what do I do next? And what I want to suggest is slow and steady. The most important things in life take time. They're not quick, they're not cheap, and they're not easy, but they work and they bring life as it was meant to be. And so all the things we're touching on, there's a whole body of content, of blogs and podcasts, and then the book has a video series and a study guide, and it's designed to shepherd the soul of a man over time through the process that we're talking about, and much, much more. And so there's tons of treasures there. And for the man or woman that's listening saying, I'm intrigued and I'm really want more, I want to say, go slow, be kind to your soul, and you can find all of that at becomingaking.com.
Well, not to worry, guys. We're going to have all the links in the show notes for you. And not to mention Morgan's incredible book, Becoming a King, The Path to Restoring the Heart of a Man. And I think we can all agree that he just gave us an incredible example of that. So I appreciate being your guinea pig today. And if the book is anything like the clarity you gave me, it has been tremendous. So, gentlemen, you can find everything that we talked about today, a link for Morgan's book, a link for him, and to connect with him, follow him on social media and everywhere else. Just go to gooddadproject.com/283 for this show. Again, gooddadproject.com/283. Morgan, what an honor. What a pleasure. I so appreciated the incredible conversation today.
This has been great. Yeah, it's an honor to be with you, and I look forward to some more miles with you.
Back at you, my friend.
Thanks, Larry.